I like to describe my journey as I got to Vox as I had never read an RFP before this job. Had never really pitched advertising or pitched brands on content. So I sort of stumbled into this particular job. I started my career 15 years ago in entertainment, if it's okay to say. As an intern, I was in entertainment. I worked at Lionsgate, and I started there, ended up being super lucky. Some assistant left, told them to hire me before I graduated college, got a full-time job while I was finishing school. And I was in this weird division that at the time was called New Media and Television Network Development. So we were still trying to create brands for cable TV. This was like 2009. And fast forward, I worked there for a few years. We launched a couple networks. The biggest one is Epix, the movie channel conglomerate. I'm not taking much credit for it. I was like, a child working on little pieces. Fast forward a bit, I hit a point where I just was like a little bit burned out of corporate world. I'd started working before college. Burned out at like 22 is a ridiculous statement, but I had been a producer while in college. I went to NYU undergrad. I had a bunch of friends who were producing films or wanted to direct films, needed a producer. I had done a bunch of shorts when I was in college, and worlds collided. One of my really good friends wanted to make a feature, and I put my hand up and I was like, let's launch a production company, let's make a feature film. And then we also did a bunch of other stuff. So I left my job, I did that for about a year. We made a feature, it's hanging out on a shelf somewhere. It's okay at best. I have a short that we made with the same director, it's fucking great. So he's good. And did that independent life for a year, ended up going sort of like, this isn't for me, independent. Found my way back into corporate world through AOL, of all places. In the world of digital video distribution. So we were like the middleman in between producers like ESPN or Hearst or Condé Nast, and then publishers, similar brands, Condé Nast, Hearst, et cetera, many, many others, distributing and syndicating content across and basically like running partnerships across the board. Kind of interesting. I look at it as like my master's degree in the internet. Because I got to understand how digital advertising work. At the time, how much of it was just straight bullshit. And then from there, there's like two roads situation where I had applied to go to grad school in London. So I was supposed to go to the London School of Economics. And on the other side of the country, I was in New York at the time, Red Bull called me and was like, hey, we're staffing up our media house team around much more video content, distribution, syndication, programming, partnerships. Interested? And I was like, yes, please, let's interview, let's do this. And basically I, whirlwind of 3 weeks, got a job offer really fast and made the choice. And instead of going to grad school, moved to LA, started working for Red Bull. I was there for 4 years. And then basically in, 2018 at this point, my wife got an amazing job in Chicago. We moved out of LA, and it was like not quite the remote friendly world it is today, and my job was not going anywhere, but I saw the writing on the wall that it wasn't going to be very good remote. And happenstance had it that Vox was hiring at the time what they were calling a director of creative strategy. I didn't know what that meant, but I said, I know content. I know how brands are doing content. I'm the guy from Red Bull. Let's talk. We did it. I ended up there, and then the fast forward of the last 5 years has been moved a little bit from overseeing pitches back at brands who want to make content of various sorts into a world where I now lead, and this has now been the last 2.5 to 3 years. I lead what we call content partnerships, which is some hybrid of like brand strategy, creative strategy, and business development. So essentially thinking about how do brands want to think about using content, oftentimes paired with what we are doing as Vox, I'll talk about a bit, and how they can sort of get to understanding that seems interesting, but I don't get it, to what should we make, how do we make it, how are we going to distribute it, how are we going to measure it, what's the right creative, how long is this going to take, what are the budgets, et cetera. And so a lot of like building partnerships ahead of what is sort of often in this world the RFP cycle, and then sort of hopefully nailing sort of building out pitches with my team, and then I work a bit once we do sell things through, essentially like overseeing and becoming sort of another go-to contact collaborator with the key clients, whether it's an agency or a brand. And I'll talk a bit more about what we do, but sort of that has ranged from feature films to social content and everything in between.
When you look at your career, what are some of the pieces that sort of started to lay the foundation of this sort of this brand storytelling framework. I mean,
Yeah.
Red Bull is sort of,
That was like the
you know,
the pivot point for sure.
yeah, but like, what did you bring from your time at AOL into that Red Bull world where you started to go like, oh, we can make entertainment that happens to have a logo on it?
Yeah, I mean, I have forever looked at what I ideally am doing with partners of all sorts is good content is good content, right? I still take that perspective while we are ultimately selling media and it's advertising or marketing in the end. That's the thread for me. It's always been about like, is this content going to connect with someone, represent a community, make you think about something, entertain you, whatever the right word is. And so that's always been the thread. And then the other thing that I think is the one little kernel that's in every single one of my jobs, save independent production, is I've been very conscious and sort of focused on distribution and distribution strategy. So where is that content going to go? And that part of it, which I didn't realize until I was at Red Bull and then even further here at Vox Media, is it's the vital part for assessing, should we do this? And then maybe did it work for a brand, is understanding where is it going? What are all the things that go along with that? Like, can I measure that distribution? How do I measure that distribution? What am I going to do? How am I going to reach the people? All that stuff is like sort of the building block to me of when you're thinking about making content as a brand. Where is it going? Because in the end, it's like if you're not reaching somebody, if you're not able to understand who you moved, and therefore at some point did it move the needle of business, you're just guessing. So that's, I think like that's the thread for me that sort of created the building block. And then I actually in the last few years have started to take an approach, and maybe this is just because of the state of the overall entertainment and media industry being challenging and figuring out how the investments in content are going to work in general, like from a studio's standpoint, that brands have this really interesting almost leg up an opportunity that they don't necessarily have to operate like an entertainment company. And so therefore they can do things that an entertainment company wouldn't from a margin standpoint, from the model in which they finance content, for the way in which they look at what's success. And then there's the whole world of like, if you're a certain kind of brand that has, whether it's retail outlets or online outlets, you have all these, call them various types of billboards that you can use to promote your content or use the content in various ways. So it's kind of an interesting mixture there, but I've come to be like, oh, I don't look at the word brand and content and think bad at all. Like there are branded content pieces that are bad, but the opportunity is there, and I think there's just like it doesn't compute to me like, oh, it's branded, therefore it's not good. You haven't watched good branded content or good branded entertainment, whatever word we're using, if you think that.
When you look at your time at Red Bull, like to me, Red Bull's like the, you know, Red Bull and Patagonia are probably like the shiny examples on a hill. And like Red Bull, to add to what you said, is like they sell a funny tasting drink in a really skinny can,
Yeah.
right? And like that's the product at the end of the day is that energy drink. But they've, at least from the outside, have always been pushing the boundary in terms of like extreme sports and how do we sort of activate around that. From the inside, how did that inform how you approach your work now, sort of learning that mechanism of, you know, one of those shining beacons?
Red Bull to me, and I am very much somebody who drank that Kool-Aid and still does, is a brand that take it down. Red Bull's a brand that the core mission and their brand purpose has been clear for them since day one. Like I'll save you the 2-hour history of Red Bull, but literally 1987, 88, when the founder of the company licensed a formula for an energy drink from Thailand, like Gives You Wings was immediately part of the mix. There were very early people on his team that like call them salespeople, marketing people, it's just whoever the hell he was going to help sell the product. One of them went to clubs and threw it in the mix with vodka and created a whole world of marketing through nightlife. Another one of them literally said, I'm going to jump in a Mini Cooper with my friend and I'm going to go give this out for free. And another like couple of years later, they were like, let's start sponsoring athletes. The founder himself was a pro skier. And so like, that is so consistent throughout what is now a 30-year plus history of that brand. And I look at that as like this trickle-down effect of thinking about, all right, that is the cornerstone, is everything that we are doing as Red Bull and then take that lesson as another brand, are we coming back to the brand mission, purpose, and the way in which we talk about that? So you look at like, you'll see action sports films that are feature-length films, or you'll see a clip of a guy jumping off of, a cliff and doing a backflip. And in both scenarios, the whole idea was like, how do we unlock sort of this mentality of gives you wings? Not literally. Please don't sue Red Bull again. That was ridiculous. And then that same ethos goes into like, there's incredible documentaries about musicians. There's a project that I worked on with distribution with an artist named Gallant, who's an American-based, actually he might be Canadian now that I think of it, R&B artist, phenomenal voice, has some roots in South Korea, and they sent him to Seoul to this whole project and exploration. It all started with like, what's that dream project for you? What's interesting to go do? And so like that ethos going through. And so if you take it into like various other brands, I always ask partners, what is that core value that is really interesting? And it doesn't have to be like mission, impact, social impact. See it, like it doesn't have to be that. It could be, we are all about fun. Like we just want to make people laugh every day. And so you can do that in a way that's like, okay, let's think about what does it mean? What is fun to you? What does that connection with humans look like? And then bring that out and start there as like the basis of what you're going to do in content.
With your work at Vox now and being sort of on the other side of that and pitching to brands, how do you approach them from a story perspective? Like what do you look at within the brand as you and your team are sort of developing a pitch? And then how are you sort of engaging in a conversation with them to be thinking about how are we going to use storytelling?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like two sides of the equation. So one is them, the brand, brand values, brand strategy, brand mission, everything at the core purpose. Like if you literally look at marketing sort of 101 style graphics and wheels and triangle, whatever it is like, explain to me everything about your brand strategy, right? What is that all about? And then in this particular use case, like what's the mission, whether there's an RFP or not. And the other part of it is us, as Vox Media, right? Like we come at it as like, we are a group of creatives. Vox Creative, the team I'm on, is like this creative studio within the world of Vox. Individuals on the team are brilliant, have wonderful ideas, could just take the brand strategy and run, but the sort of pitch, if you will, of the secret sauce is, what does Vox Media bring to the table? So it's, it's 15 to 20 different editorial brands and IP platforms and a Vox Media podcast network set of shows and the audiences we reach. And so the whole idea, it starts with like, your brand strategy, and then let's try to anchor it in like, what's something that we do, whether it's, we have an audience that is really interested in parenting. Let's go after that. Or it's like, we have the #1 pet brand in the world in the dodo. Like, okay, what can we do with that? And then pair that with your strategy of like making people smile, like that kind of stuff. And so that is like the basis of where we start, hopefully, if we're doing that right. Because we need to basically prove ourselves to that brand that we both are strategic and creative, and we're like great partners to work with, and we're going to be wonderful to work with throughout the whole process. But also like, what is the undeniable reason to work with Vox Media? And figure out sort of how to blend those two things together.
What is the secret sauce for you? Like what makes it exciting for you to be at Vox and go like, this is the toolkit we have to think through your brand?
There's a few things. I think every so often I get really excited about something that one of our editorial networks did that we can then say, okay, how do we build on that? So to give you an example of something I personally really love, I'm a big sports fan. SB Nation is our sports network. It's sort of the largest team and community and affinity site-based network of sports editorial brands in the US. It may be the largest in the world based on scale. There's 200-300 of these sites for individual teams. So if you're a Boston Celtics fan like I am, I've got my own site, and it's like the perfect community. Or if you're like a huge women's soccer fan, we've got a site called All for 11. It's about soccer. They have a video team that we refer to as Secret Base. So their brand is Secret Base as our video. It's our on YouTube sort of world, and they make these incredible franchises. Like their video content is bonkers good. The engagement's incredible. I often describe it as like super in-depth, like geeked out in the best way, sports explainery style content. So you get like cut and paste clips and a little bit of footage, and then you get like an incredible narration of asking like, right, so what happened to that moment in this World Series game in 1974 that brought us to today's moment with the rematch, right? And so I get inspired by that stuff to be like, okay, there's this audience that loves that. And I got a brand that just said, I want to talk about how technology is infused in sports. And I go, well, let's come up with a concept. I have this concept sitting. I've tried to get this sold called impossible hypothesis. And I'm like, how do we compare the agility of an F1 driver to a skier going through, a downhill track and so on and so forth. And the idea is like, can I make something with a brand that feels like the same formula that what that editorial team is doing? And so for me, like that's one of the secret sauces, if you will, of what we've got. It's not just the creative, it's the creative with the exact audience that you want to reach that's going to be super interested in the format that we said this is going to work. That's like, check, 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 we get it right. We obviously don't get it perfectly right all the time. We make stuff that like works, but it's not perfect, or it's great for the brand, but it's not as good for our audience, or whatever it is. And then like the array of what goes on starts to be like, okay, what have we got from a format standpoint? I mentioned podcasting. We've got this amazing podcast network. We've got, the ability to create mini-series with our shows. We've got the ability to create sort of 90-second custom stories that we'll toss in the ad slots. We've got the ability to create full-on podcasts, but then distribute them within a world where we get to benefit from like a whole network effect of cross-promotion and all that kind of stuff. So that's the stuff that like starts to get juicy and interesting. That's like a little bit different than being solely at, either a creative company or a creative agency or a production company. That I find to be sort of like the stuff that we want to work with.
When you're looking at the space and like, we're at Sundance and there's a bunch of brands and everyone's sharing their work and, a lot of it's really amazing and, we're sort of pulling all this inspiration. What are you seeing in this space right now that you're really excited about? And what are the things that you want to see more of?
I'm seeing a good deal of filmmaker and more better said is creative-led content where the brand just let it run. And obviously the ones that make it work are still anchored in that core brand value or strategy. But this idea of saying to a filmmaker, do something interesting, do something wild, is really fascinating to me. I want to see more of that where it's like weird formats. And weird not meaning in like atypical, but like more musicals. I don't know. I want to make a heist film with one of our partners that we've been making a bunch of stuff about scams about. Like I want to do stuff that's like of a various set of formats that are fascinating. And then the other part of the equation, we talk about this all the time, of like these big platforms, if you will, where there's all these different components of the campaigns, where it's like not just the thing at the middle. Like for me, there's a few films that screen here. The film itself that we watch, awesome. The reason it's super successful for a brand is because they took it on tour to go to 50 different film festivals and they activated around those film festivals or something like that. So more of that's interesting to me. This isn't necessarily like pro Vox Media, but like I want to see more of the bigger streaming platforms just get less scared about branded entertainment. Not that every brand marketing and content marketing thing needs to be of the level of entertainment, but in a world where, as I said before, like if good content is good content, then a great show from a brand could theoretically sit beside the best show on on Netflix right now.
Well, I think even to a degree, like, I don't know, from my perspective, like A Drive to Survive.
Yeah, I mean, that show was actually like concepted at first to be about Red Bull racing, like just Red Bull racing, which is why they're so featured at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great instance. That's another use case where it's like brands all over the show, but that's because the sport itself is that. I don't really consider that show Drive to like as branded entertainment. People have often said it's F1 branded entertainment, but I'm like, they are an entertainment company. Like that's what they do. We're just turning it into a show. But like I think that's part of the wave of happening, and it's a realization that like people don't mind that. Like we as Vox Media Studios, our studios division, we make a show called Full Swing, which is basically the Drive to Survive for golf.
Right.
And so we've been following the PGA Tour for the last couple of years. Same deal, and like super entertaining world of golf. Very, very cool. Between us and the team over at Netflix, we've had multiple conversations about, in addition to all the brands that are already in the show because they're part of the league or the tour, are there brands that we can help do more integrations with? And that's like a little bit more traditional TV style integration than full-on brand storytelling where the brand is directing what's going on in the story, or at least heavily having an influence on like why it even exists. But that stuff's like one part of the equation. There's a show on Hulu that Samsung sort of is behind called Exposure. That's a photo competition show that's sort of like a no-brainer. Like, oh yeah, you can do a photo competition show with Samsung phones. Great. We're making some stuff right now that's like in the vein of like pilots. And you know, I can't talk about which ones they are yet, but like even seeing early cuts, I'm like, this is pure entertainment, and I can already see the other episodes. And to take it back to what I was saying is like, I already foresee if we went to the bigger networks and said, hey, let's turn this thing into a show, they would say, cool, but there's a brand behind this, so like, where's the money? Versus being like, this is phenomenal entertainment. Now, granted, I could eat my own words because people come to us and say, could you distribute our content? And we say, can't do that for free. We're not going to acquire it. You got to pay us for distribution. So it's the balance of like what's keeping the industry alive when most of the quote, you know, media and entertainment companies, if you are not a giant tech company, are just trying to find their footing right now.
You mentioned it earlier, but I want to dive into it a little bit more, which was that you said not all brands need to be entertainment companies and operate in that traditional studio model.
Yeah.
Can you dive into that a bit and like how are you seeing brands approaching this sort of space, and why do you stand on that and go like, you don't need to chase that?
So I'll use like two different examples that are completely different sides of the coin that I think are probably equally amazing pieces of content. The first one is the thing that I've heard a million people say is like, oh my God, this is the pinnacle of brand entertainment this year, being Barbie is not branded entertainment in my opinion. Barbie is a Hollywood product. It is based on a brand, and it's years and years of working with that brand, and that brand is heavily featured in it, and they made an amazing marketing campaign around it. I'm sure it's selling a ton of stuff for them. That is not brand entertainment. That is a massive Hollywood film. That's not the bar that I think most people should be going for. Like, hell yeah, props to Mattel. They're making money on that. I don't know what the deal in the back end is, but I'm sure they made money on that film, right? I think that you look at something like what Red Bull or Arc'teryx or Patagonia has made, and they're not doing it to say this film needs to cover its own cost and make us a lot of money. They're doing it because this film represents what the brand is all about. And through making this film, we can create pure entertainment for somebody in a way that is fascinating. And we might make some money off of it. Like, we may sell it, we may put it in theaters, we may get it licensed, but you don't need to look at it as like, okay, it's a P&L game like any other business, like Barbie as a movie was, and say, okay, like, what is the true purpose? The example film that was like one of the biggest ones that Rebel did is a movie called The Art of Flight. And that became a phenomenon where it was just like crushed it. They made sequels. It's an amazing snowboarding film featuring Travis Rice. And they did a ton of screenings around the country. They went to different ski towns. They threw events around it. And the juice they squeezed out of it was a lot more and a lot different than what you're operating as if your goal is to sell, you know, the film, make money off the film. Their goal in the back end was drive loyalty to Red Bull and at some point sell more cans of Red Bull. And like, that to me is super interesting. Secret sauce of every brand, right? Like, not everybody's going to have the giant massive budgets that Red Bull has or be private so you can spend money in a way that's different than others. But even ones that are much smaller or much different circumstances, I think there's that, like, the approach of it is like, you don't have to think about this like an entertainment company. And I think that's something that I've seen this in the last couple of years. Brands getting enamored and excited about making entertainment are making the leap from, oh yeah, I'm interested in making something that is more entertainment-like. Therefore, I need to think about it like entertainment. And oh my God, this could be another profit center for my business. And I personally think like there is a time and a place for that. There are films that you can make and sell. We made one with a brand. I just sold it. That's cool. But I actually think the stronger strategy in, I don't want to give a percentage, but in a high percentage of the time is don't think of it like an entertainment business and think of it as it's part of your marketing mix, but the product at the middle of it is as interesting and engaging as entertainment is.
What are you personally excited about over the next 3 to 5 years? Like, what are you looking at and going like, yes, we're going there?
That's fun. 3 to 5 years is funny. I actually think that and this may be an easy cop-out answer, I think that what's happening with AI is going to spur a lot of human creativity. I think that AI is going to become this incredible tool set for a lot of people that we use for our betterment, right? Like whether you're an editor and it helps you assemble your cut faster, or whether you're somebody writing a script and you're able to create exposition quicker or write some dialogue as a draft for you faster. Then there's the other side where people are like, oh, well, they're just going to create for us and it's going to be actors that are AI. Creative people and human beings are going to win. Not to say AI is not going to be part of our life and in many ways take over, whatever that means. But I think it's going to spur some super cool creativity. And I think, I personally think this, and we've actually been doing a study that we're going to release in a few weeks that is about, we do this thing called the Year Explained as part of our explainer studio. And it's just a look ahead at like things that are going to be buzzy and conversation based and make us all think and ask questions. And one of the pieces of data is coming out of this and the stuff we're talking about is like uniting us as humans is the fact that we are not AI in a weird way, right? Like it's the only thing that people of all walks of life, different political backgrounds, different parts of the world, whatever, we are all definitely not AI until there's a world where AI is walking among us and then we're in a whole world of difference. But my point is that like, I really think that it's gonna bring out new types of creativity, people who are already creative, thinking in different ways, almost like you're like trying to beat the machine or just stuff that it can't do. I'm excited for that. And I think, to bring it back to brands, I think brands will experiment in the space. I think brands will be the ones to look at some independent creators who come up with fascinating stories and say, I want to make that with you. I think brands have this really interesting opportunity that is the exact same reason why the entertainment companies are sort of like running scared and trying to figure this out. And all the different unions are trying to figure out how do we deal with AI. They're thinking about it from an entertainment business lens. Brands don't have to do that, so we can take risks or we can work with creatives in different ways. And I think that becomes, I think it's becoming something that's like really fascinating. I will revise that statement in 6 months when everything about AI changes, and then the next 6 months and so on. But I think that's one thing I'm really interested in.
Amazing. Okay, before I let you go, I got 5 questions for you.
Let's do it.
First, what is a story that had a big impact on your life and why?
Wow. I am thinking of a brand thing, and that's not as fun. I was driving down the road in Peru on my way from Lima to a town called Paracas, I think, on the coast. And I had my first experience of being pulled over by being racially profiled in a way that happens all the time in the US, but not with people of my skin complexion. And that like threw a whole thing in my brain of like, I felt weird after it happened. Like it was fine. I ended up having to pay like a small bribe. They do that there. Not great, but it happens. But I just felt weird and icky. And that like has definitely impacted my life in a very interesting way. I'd always been a person who I've like worked in social justice my whole life. I grew up doing it. My college was partially paid for from a Martin Luther King scholarship. But that like threw a different new trigger in my brain.
Wild.
Yeah.
What is one film you think everyone should watch?
Rear Window.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I like that.
It still holds up.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit faster paced than stuff of its time. And it's been remade in many ways, like even if we're not calling them remakes, but people are doing the Rear Window thing over and over and over again. There's been some films that are like very much clearly a Rear Window remake, or like a play on it, an interpolation. But I think people should see that. It's really interesting.
I love it.
Fascinating.
That's a great one. What is something you never leave home without?
I mean, other than like my phone and my contact lenses. I mean, physical items, there's not much else that like really would never leave home with in that. So if we're not talking physical items, hopefully a positive perspective on my day, I guess.
I'll take it. I'll accept it.
Okay.
What's an important place for you to go to find inspiration?
Outside in the mountains. Like, yeah, I'm a big like go to mountains person. Like this, where we are in Utah, is like, I love it up in the mountains, even though I've basically always lived my life in cities from when I moved to New York for college. I've lived in New York, in LA, in Chicago, in Madrid, like all huge cities, but like I need the serenity of outdoors, and mountains are the number one. Like love going to the beach too, but the moment I can, I don't know, there's something about the sound that disappears when you're up high in a mountain in a weird way that like chills me out and like reminds me of things. The other space I will say is airplanes. I do some of my best thinking on airplanes. I try, if I don't need to be on the internet, to not be on the internet. It's one of the only places and only times that I'm like, I'm allowed to just be me. I'm not available for people. I'm not accessible right now. It's okay. And I actually like, I tend to get inspired, whether it's like write either like a thing I needed to do for work, or write a thing I want to do in life, or like catch myself being like, let me bring myself back to the moment of my life and like enjoy things. And it's kind of cool. And also air travel's ridiculous. You're like on a, you're up in the sky floating, and it works. Crazy.
I always find there's like a level of relief when a flight doesn't have Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
And
100%.
you're like, oh, okay, well,
Yep. I'm so
it's
with
peaceful
you.
now.
It's great.
Okay, last one. What do you think is the most important skill for storytellers to develop?
There's no one answer to this question for me, but it's a lot of bringing yourself back down to earth and seeing yourself in other people's shoes. I think the best stories, whether we're talking big giant Hollywood film or a 2-second social sort of story, are when you're like, that just represented somebody really interestingly, and you got to the heart of just like what it feels like to be human.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, sir.
Of course. Thank you. Good stuff.